This position is often referred to as the quarterback's security blanket, and today I'll give you 5 bold predictions on the tight ends on the Bearcats roster for this upcoming season. That's on today's episode of Locked On Bearcats on Bold Prediction Tuesday.
Our Locked On Bearcats, your daily podcast on the Cincinnati Bearcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Don't forget, if you are watching on the Locked On Bearcats YouTube channel, to subscribe, and you can also like and share a comment on today's video. If you are downloading from an audio platform, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast, don't forget, you can subscribe there too, and you can share a comment and or give it a rating. All of that helps more Bearcats fans like you find this podcast. Alex Frank here with you on this Tuesday, May the 24th? May the 24th of 2022. It is Georgia primary election day here in Georgia, the mid-state. I'm going to be hell-bent at work tonight, but that's okay because I'm here with you first thing in the morning, first listen every day, bringing all of my experiences from my days as sports director of Bearcast Media, was a play-by-play announcer and color analyst for Bearcats football and men's basketball games home and away, and hosted a weekly sports radio show in the Jack and Joan Strader radio studio called Sports Any Way You Want It. And I'm here to give you Bearcats content any way you want it here on the Locked On Podcast Network and the Locked On Bearcats podcast. So here we go. It's another episode of another edition of Bold Prediction Tuesday. Thank you. And today's position, we're going to talk about the tight ends. This is a position, the tight ends, if I didn't say that, enunciate that well. This position is a position of strength for the Bearcats. It might be the best position group on this offense. It's going to help whoever starts a quarterback develop, whether it be Ben Bryant, whether it be Evan Prater. It should be Evan Prater, by the way. They're red zone threats. They can also help any quarterback. You know, maybe maybe Brady Lichtenberg is going to be the new starting quarterback. I don't know who it's going to be, but whoever it is, they are going to be able to provide so much for this offense, whether it's moving the chains, whether it's, picking up, those hard-earned yards, bailing a quarterback out, red zone threats, up the seam like Leonard Taylor against Notre Dame, whatever it may be. The tight ends is going to be this offense's best asset. They may not be the most explosive assets. They may not be the best assets, but it's going to be the most important asset to this team. Now, I do think both tight ends, Josh Whyle and Leonard Taylor, who I think by the end of the season will both be NFL draft prospects, and I believe you will hear their name called next year, both of their names called next year in the NFL draft, because I believe they're going to play such an important role and they're going to get more exposure. Alec Pierce last year had 20 more receptions than both tight ends leading the way on this roster. And I'm not even talking about the third tight end on this team, who I believe will be tight end 3, but could be, spoiler alert, this team's breakout player this season. I'll get to that later on in the show. But let's start things off. Bold prediction number 1. Both tight ends will have at least 5 touchdowns this season. Leonard Taylor and Josh Whyle will both have 5 touchdowns this season. Why do I think that? Well, I do believe that this offense at the start of the season will be driven through the run game and the tight ends. Let's not forget that that's what this offense historically in recent years has been driven through. Think about all the great tight ends that have come through this program. Josiah DeGuara, Brent Selleck, Garrett Selleck, Travis Kelce, Tyler Cogswell. There are so many great tight ends that have come through this program. And Josh Whyle and Leonard Taylor are the next 2 in line. And I haven't even hit on I didn't even mention Bruno LaBelle. There are so many options. There are so many great tight ends that have come through this program. And this offense is driven through that position. Remember how I said on Friday or on yesterday's show, rather, Remember how I said that Tyler Scott can be the Bearcats' prolific receiver that the Bearcats have never had on their team? Well, that's because it's an offense that has never really been about having a prolific receiver. Yes, Marty Gilliard was, but that was before all the great tight ends that come through this program. Josh Whyle and Leonard Taylor are the latest examples of that. And this is what this offense is going to be driven through. For the quarterback who starts, whether against Arkansas or whomever in any big game, the tight end is their security blanket. You saw Desmond Ridder. There's a reason Josiah DeGuara was so successful his first 2 seasons, because that was the guy Ridder trusted the most. He had the first passing touchdown of Ridder's career in 2018. He had the first passing touchdown of 2019, and he was just Mr. Reliable, Mr. Consistent. Could go out in the flat and run after the catch. Could go over the middle. And that's what you're going to get with these 2 tight ends now. They're red zone threats too. So they're going to get those receptions in the red zone. I went back and watched the Notre Dame game highlights over the weekend. And Leonard Taylor's touchdown. He was lined up at the line of scrimmage, delayed, popped out, back of the end zone. Ridder just threw it right to him. That's what this offense can be. And that 36-yard reception to Leonard Taylor, not only is he a big tight end, he can run. I mean, that's a tough route for a tight end because you got to get to that spot. It's much like CJ Uzama's catch in the playoffs on that up the seam route pass from Joe Burrow late in the first half. You got to be fast to run that route. So Tyler Scott is not going deep and not snagging deep balls. This offense is probably grounding and pounding their way into the red zone, and then they're going to finish it off with one of these 2 tight ends. These guys will deliver in the red zone, and that's where they're going to get a lot of receptions. Now they will also get receptions elsewhere, first downs, moving the chains. If they need some yards to get a drive going. Tight ends, they've become more of a commodity than maybe they were, 15, 20 years ago. But they're a huge asset to any college football team and certainly any NFL team. So with that, now, this Bearcats receiving core, believe it or not, is actually stacked beyond Taylor and Whyle. And I say that even with losing Alec Pierce. There's a lot of targets to go around this year. A lot of targets to be distributed. So therefore, bold prediction number 2, neither Whyle or Taylor will lead the team in receptions. I don't think either of them will. I believe a wide receiver will lead the team in receptions. That's going to come next week on the 5 bold wide receiver predictions. That doesn't mean I don't think Josh Whyle and Leonard Taylor are good tight ends. I just think there's too many targets to go around. I just think that they are going to be 2 great assets. They're going to have their target shares. They're going to cancel each other out that way. So they're not going to lead the team in receptions, right? Both of them will have their moments. They'll even out. And that's why I don't think either of them will lead the team in receptions. Last year, Taylor had 28 receptions. Whyle had 26. That was not even close to Alec Pierce's team leading 52. And you saw the target distribution that went around. It was Ryan Montgomery. It was Jerome Ford. It was Leonard Taylor. It was Josh Whyle. It was Trey Tucker. It was Alec Pierce. It was Tyler Scott. There are a lot of players on this team, a lot of receivers on this team that are going to get their share of targets. And that's why I don't think Taylor or Whyle is going to lead the team in receptions. But that does not mean that I don't think they're important assets to this team. You know how I feel about that. They are important assets to this team. Up next, bold prediction number 3. And there's one tight end that we're not talking about a whole lot, but we will be come the season. I'll explain why next. But first, a word from BetOnline. You see, BetOnline continues to be your number 1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to the playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Once you are finished listening to Locked On Bearcats, you can check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. It covers the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. But as always, we thank you for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. Alex Frank here with you each and every day. 5 bold predictions, the tight end position. There is one tight end that we are not talking about a lot. We are talking about Josh Whyle and Leonard Taylor. When both those guys announced they were coming back, that was a huge development in the offseason, and it set the tone for this upcoming season. As soon as those guys came back, I knew how this offense would be driven. Now, the interesting wrinkle in this is Mike Denbrock is no longer here. Mike Denbrock was not only the offensive coordinator, but he was the tight ends coach. The new offensive coordinator, Gino Guidugli, is the quarterbacks coach. So there's a new tight ends coach in place. Bearcats made a bunch of position coaching changes in the offseason, and one of those obviously, and the tight ends position is now led by Nate Letton, who was a graduate assistant prior to his promotion to tight ends coach. Offensive graduate assistant from the last 2 years, and it was a 22-2 record, 2 straight conference championships, and of course, the college football playoff berth last year. By the way, I'm just reading these stats. The Bearcats broke school records last year for touchdowns with 70. And that's just wild to think about. That means they averaged 5 touchdowns a game. And you take away the 6 points they scored against Alabama where they didn't get in the end zone. And you think about 70 touchdowns in 13 games. That's almost 5.5 touchdowns a game. And they also scored 516 points. Both are school records. That tells you how great last year's offense was. Now, there were more draft picks on defense than there were on offense. Offense had Ritter, Ford, and Alec Pierce. Defense had Sauce Gardner, Brian Cook, Myjai Sanders, Kobe Bryant, Curtis Brooks, and of course I'm now forgetting one of them. Myjai Sanders. Anyway, you get the point. How many offensive players were there? I'm trying to now think about this. You had Pierce, Ritter, and Ford on offense. And then you had, Darian Beavers. That's right. So there's your 6. But still, the offense last year was really good. Part of that was the tight ends. I mean, you go back and you look at the statistics for the tight ends last year. And there's one player that we're not talking about who you're going to see this year. Apparently, I don't have the... okay. Anyway. So, let's get right to it. Spring game. One of the breakout stars was not only Evan Prater, but the guy who's going to break out this season. And you heard Russ Heltman mention it on this podcast after the spring game. Cayman Mateer. He is going to be the breakout star this year. So much so that bold prediction number 3, Mateer will finish with at least 20 receptions. I believe he can be that good. He's the biggest breakout player on this year's roster. So imagine having 3 viable red zone options. Try forcing defenses to defend that. Try defending that entirely. Mateer is going to be this unsung hero. I remember Leonard Taylor. You didn't really know who he was prior to the 2019 season. You knew he was on the roster, but he came on late at the end of the season. He had a touchdown against Memphis. By the way, he had a critical 8-yard kick return. It was like only 8 yards. A kick return against ECU in 2019. They squib kicked it. And Leonard Taylor picked the ball up and just started running. Gained 8 to 10 yards. Those were critical yards on the Bearcats' game-winning field goal drive. So he broke out at the end of the 2019 season, went on to have a fantastic 2020 season, had a stellar 2021 season. And now he's going to be one of the leaders on this offense. But Cayman Mateer is going to be like who Leonard Taylor was in 2019. It might take him towards the end of the season to break out. But at the end of the day, he is a player that I believe is going to add another dimension to this offense. He had a touchdown in the spring game where he, from 16 yards out, ran into the end zone and then cut across the back line, the end line, sideline, and made a touchdown catch. He can be that guy. Add new wrinkles to plays and play designs for this offense. He had a great spring game, which more often than not, which I think, not more often than not, I think it will translate to success this upcoming season. So up next, I'll give you the final two bold predictions for tight ends, just how good the tandem of Wiley and Taylor can be. But first, let's hear a word from two of our sponsors. Alex Frank here with you, Locked On Bearcats. Each and every day, it's another episode of Bold Prediction Tuesday, the 5 bold predictions for the tight ends this year for the Cincinnati Bearcats. So we know Josh Wiley and Leonard Taylor are the strength of this group, maybe the strength of this offense. We know that Cayman Mateer, I think he's going to be the breakout player this year because of the success he had in the spring game. I also think that there is room in the tight end room for him to do that. The receiver room is stacked. So you may not see a breakout player there, but you will see a breakout player at tight end. Imagine having 3 tight ends. An offense that historically over the last 15 years has been driven through that position in the passing game. I believe it will be driven through that this year. And the tight end tandem between Leonard Taylor and Josh Wiley, it might be the best in the country. So, let's go to bold prediction number 4. At least one tight end will rank in the top 5 in the country in receptions and or yards for all tight ends in the country. Now, I haven't looked at every other team's tight ends the top tight ends in the country, but I just know the production from Taylor and Wiley last year will translate to this year. We look at the numbers from last year. Josh Wiley with 6 touchdowns, Leonard Taylor with 4. So it's not far-fetched to say that they will both have at least 5 this year. It's not far-fetched to say that they can lead or be amongst the lead in tight ends for receptions and or yards. It can be that way. Because you look at offenses around the country. You look at the top of college football, and it's a spread offense, meaning they're not utilizing the tight ends. They're utilizing receivers. And Cincinnati has never really been that. It's been ground and pound. It's becoming a little more spread offense. It became that way with Desmond Ridder. It might become that way with Evan Prater, especially once they join the Big 12. But this is going to be still a year where the tight ends are going to take over the strength of this offense. And that's why I do believe that they can, one of Taylor or Wiley, can lead the country in receptions and or yards. So let's go to bold prediction number 5, because it was Josh Wiley last year who had 332 receiving yards, 12.8 yards per reception. And now that Alec Pierce is not here dominating the targets, bold prediction number 5, Josh Wiley will finish with at least 500 receiving yards. He's going to be Prater's number 1 guy, whether that be in the red zone, whether it just be bailing him out, just to try to get a drive started, go over the middle. Heck, Josh Wiley bailed Desmond Ridder out. Remember that play in the Peach Bowl 2020, the end of the first half, Ridder scrambling around trying to find an open man. He finds Josh Wiley just, lurking in the end zone. Ridder heaves it up for grabs. Wiley catches it for the score. I mean, Wiley can be that guy for Evan Prater. Prater is very similar to Ridder in skill set, and we saw the success that Ridder and Wiley had together. Prater and Wiley can be that same tandem. It's bailing him out to get drives going. It's going over the middle. It's moving the chains, whatever. He will be the number 1 guy in this offense. I firmly believe that. All right, that's going to do it today here on Locked On Bearcats on another episode of Bold Prediction Tuesday. Next week, it's 5 bold predictions for the wide receiver position. That's the 4th of our 11 Bold Prediction Tuesday episodes leading up to the season. Coming up tomorrow, I am efforting getting on the host of Locked On Buffalo Bills, Joe Marino. I want to talk to him about what he thinks about the overtime rules, college versus pro. I've always been fascinated by this. I think college overtime is great because there will always be a winner, unlike in the NFL in the regular season where you can tie. So I want to ask him his thoughts on, um, the overtime rules in the NFL, how he feels about the change to the playoffs where now both teams get one possession. So hopefully going to get him on the show tomorrow. Once again, if you're watching on the Locked On Bearcats YouTube channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You can also like and share a comment on today's video. And if you're downloading from an audio platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast, don't forget to hit that subscribe button there too. You can also like and share. You can also share a comment and or give it a rating. All of that helps more Bearcats fans like you find this podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NBA Draft, Locked On NBA Big Board. Rafael Barlow, Richard Stayman, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin give fans an in-depth look into the biggest prospects, the latest player rankings, and of course, big boards. Follow Locked On NBA Big Board every day on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Frankie_Natty with 2 N's and an ATI. You can follow me on Instagram, AlexFrank9_, and email me at alex3frank@gmail.com. All lowercase, alex3frank@gmail.com. I'm Alex Frank for the Locked On Bearcats podcast. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. If you're listening in the mid-state, middle Georgia, have a great Georgia primary election day. Enjoy our coverage. We're over at WGXA News, and I will talk to you tomorrow here on the Locked On Bearcats podcast.